Hello, my name is Jonathan Forster, and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking podcast on interior design. I'm an interior designer and educator. My job is to improve quality of life and productivity by helping people to create beautiful and practical spaces to live and work in. The Multi-Story Thinking podcast takes an educational slant to the interior design world. If, like me, you are curious about how things are done within the industry, want to know how people got their breaks and how they've developed their careers, and get some top tips and advice, then this is the podcast for you. So sit back, relax, as we help unravel the mysteries of interior design. Laura Perryman is the founder and director of Colour of Saying, a colour, materials and finishes design studio based in London, which curates forward-thinking colour and material design insights and experiences for brands and organisations. Her work spans trend forecasting, material research and innovation, product design and visual brand identity, alongside lecturing and writing. Her new book, The Colour Bible, is an essential and inspirational guide to colour in art and design and condenses years of Laura's experience of working with colour. In this episode, we discover how Laura transitioned from a degree in textiles to product design and designing user experiences, the importance of narrative when working with colour, how colour and material choices can directly affect our brains and influence our behaviour, and I finally get to know what CMF design stands for. I was quite interested in the whole process of getting from doing your degree. I mean, this is like a life story, isn't it, almost? But to how you sort of shifted from textiles into colour. But I just want to say about the book. Here it is. I really love this.
Yeah, you've got so. Oh, yeah, good one.
It's the and do you know what I like about it? I mean, apart from the content, it's the size and the weight and just the way it feels. It's a kind of smaller book, isn't it? I don't know how you describe it, but a nice size and a nice weight, and it's beautifully put together, which I think is a great start with anything you want to read, isn't it? You've got to enjoy the process. But I enjoyed this so much, I took it on holiday.
That's good, because it's so interesting to how people are like using it, because I think, I don't know if it is a sort of cover to cover book, but it's not meant to, I don't think it's not meant to be, it's meant to be like, oh, you might just dip into it if you're thinking about
you can go
or something, you know.
You can choose a colour and just read about it and then put it down. The content and on top of that is fabulous, you know. So I was really interested in how you got to the point of deciding to write a book about colour. I suppose that's the culmination of a career that's involved colour right from the start, you know. But to actually writing a book, how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, actually. It was probably like a two-prong attack, I would say. So yes, I have had a career in CMF design and colour design and trends. Through that career, I've always held colour very highly, and I've written about it and documented it through my work, and through every time I've spoken internationally or at trade shows or been invited, I've always, you know, put out there into the ether that I think colour is amazing and it's a tool that can go far beyond just aesthetics. And then one day a publisher called me and said, we really like what you're doing, and would you like to help us write this book about colour? It literally sprang from nowhere is the way that I would describe it. But I think there's something also very serendipitous about putting yourself out there and pursuing, you know, your own beliefs and your own, your own strengths, really.
Yeah.
And also I have had a really varied commercial career, you know, working in industry, working with big corporate companies as well as small brands, advising on colour palettes, advising on the ways that products could be designed better for people, and for different industries. And sometimes colour features really highly in that, and sometimes it was less featured so much. But I think at the same time as having that industry career and that industry experience, I kept up a research agenda or a kind of creative agenda with colour behind the scenes always. And that, you know, as a creative, I think that's really, really important, that you're right, that you're sort of, you're pursuing your own ideas, and when you can, obviously within the ebb and flow of life and all of life's things that are going on as well. And but I've always pursued kind of making colour, and I've always had a really strong interest in like what things are made from, and from a material point of view and from a colour point of view. And through my own kind of creative practice and processes, I've made colour in different forms using different materials, to question and create my own colour library, and which has become very useful over the years when I've had lots of clients who want certain colours or unique colours for certain applications, rather than just picking out a Pantone chip, for instance. And so that's what happened really, was that they kind of picked up on me through, you know, me putting myself out there and sort of and putting out like research and also creative responses to colour. And then from there, like, you know, there was a small structure for the book, but there was no content and there was no major direction for the book. And I felt like the publishers really wanted a book about the history of colour, and I just made it really clear that like a lot of my knowledge and expertise is more about where colour is today, and also where colour's going in the future as well. And so they were really keen and incredibly supportive to support a full spectrum of colour. So from the pigments that we know, or very familiar with, or embedded in the kind of social cultural history of things, all the way through to like what I would term as, you know, some new revolutions in colour or evolutions in colour that have come even quite, you know, relatively quite recently. And also trying to stitch that together in a spectrum which is chronological but has got nuance into it, because now of course, you know, in the modern day, colour touches on all sorts of different industries, and it's a very multifaceted tool, I
thought the way in which you've structured it, I mean, I suppose the thing about colour, the colour spectrum does give you a tool, doesn't it, to organise, and the selection of colours is really quite interesting. But also you've got a front end which is a bit about the history and a bit about the science and a bit about the theory, which I thought was really fascinating, because I remember doing the colour wheel at school, you know, and you think, yeah, I've got colour, I know colour, but actually there's so much to it. And the way in which you just deconstruct the colour systems as well is great, because I think a lot of designers probably use those terms without knowing what they mean, you know, like, I mean, I can never even remember, what is it, CM, whatever it is, you know, the
CMYK and RGB.
Yeah, like you use those, like, oh yeah, but not realizing what it means. And also the Dulux color system, we had a guy from Dulux who explained the numbers, and then suddenly it makes sense, you know, that it's a really carefully calibrated system. But yeah, choosing the colors, how did you decide on because you haven't got every color in the world there, have you? You've chosen quite cleverly, I think, some really great colors with good stories. And I think you talk about the narrative of a color. How important is the narrative for you of color?
Definitely. I think, you know, in an industry which is, you know, I suppose driven by aesthetics and by kind of meaning and worth and value and all those kind of things, like I think, you know, color narratives are very, very important from a CMF point of view. You know, often I have to sell into a client why they should take a particular color. And I think, you know, design ends up being a very subjective place where it's like, well, I like this and I don't like this, and that's why something gets chosen. And actually that's completely wrong, because there's lots of really great information about why certain colors should be applied in certain contexts, such as the reason why pink, you know, there's loads of really interesting research around pink, that it can lower heart rate, it can calm us. you know, regardless of what it looks like, it can actually change the way that we behave. And actually that information, that data is worth far more than, you know, whether somebody likes something or not. And so those narratives are really, really important when it comes to design decisions, but also when it comes to consumer appeal. It's like a kind of both sides, really. People love stories, right? And so often, you know, especially within something like Dulux Colour of the Year, you know, the story behind what that colour is going to be is ultimately far, far, far more research than ultimately even what the colour is going to be somehow, because it's like, you know, people have to go along those journeys in order to buy into something. But I'm really, really into, and I'm keen around, like, you know, making sure that there's the right kind of research data, scientific knowledge and understanding about colour, so that, you know, you can apply some of those fundamental rules and make great decisions and make better decisions about why you might apply a colour. And that's why, as you say in the start of that book, you know, all of these like fundamental elements like colour theory, you know, we might have been taught at school, but designers somehow like lose the track if it's not within some of their mainstay education. And actually there's just some really simple fundamental principles that are just why certain color combinations work better, because of the way that we perceive them with our eyes, with the way that we look at them, and therefore they become really easy to look at, and therefore they become very acceptable. And actually that's the way you can kind of tie color and product in together. If you want an easy kind of sell, or a way that, you know, the color can just appeal and be immediately accepted, there are certain ways that you can put colors together that mean that they will be ultimately.
Yeah, I think the way in which you talk about that, this, if you might call it the theory or the science behind color, is quite instructive. I get the sense that lots of people just choose color based on, you know, what they like, what the latest Pinterest trends are, you know, or even what the latest color of the year is. Oh yeah, I'll paint it that color. But to actually dig a bit deeper, and I think with interiors, it's fundamental as an element within the space, isn't it? To help influence the way people feel. And often it's the last thing we did think about. You know, it's, oh right, well now what color should we paint it? You know, it's I think it needs to be elevated further up the hierarchy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what I tried to do in the book as well, is just like elevate the subject matter, definitely bring it out of the historical context as well, because it's important that we understand that it's an incredibly contemporary tool.
Yes.
And it's got way more facets about it than just painting or applied colour, and that some of the innovations that are featured in the book as well, to do with structural colour, you know, highlight some of the potential applications of colour and the difference in spectrum that we could even achieve, you know, beyond just a singular colour. So, you know, those things are there to kind of provoke and enrich people's knowledge about, you know, this subject matter, that it's not just all about these historical pigments. Actually, there's some incredible innovations in this sector at the moment, and it's leading in some ways, you know, with materials at the same time. And, you know, these subjects, colour and materials, are becoming incredibly important in the future of like how we design stuff. And, you know, within the context of sustainability and all these kind of bigger drivers at the moment, you know, how we choose colour and materials ultimately will impact, you know, carbon footprint, recyclability, all of these things. And so they are just really important parts of the design conversation, design decision-making conversation, I think.
Yeah, I think that idea of the structural colours, that's the colour inherent in the actual object, isn't it? And as opposed to being applied, and that's more sustainable, I guess, in terms of, you know, we're not adding something to the original thing. But yeah, colour, I think it's like, it's such a, I mean, that's what we're trying to really push more with our students, is the understanding of how important it is in terms of creating mood and atmosphere and influencing the way people behave. What I'm quite curious about is that how are there differences in the way people perceive colour, you know, culturally, or has it changed over time? You know, that some colours have a certain association. And I did see this lecture about the impact of colonialism on colour a few weeks ago, where, you know, certain colours are linked to the exploitation of the world, and it's like, oh my goodness, that's a whole other spectrum of things to consider. I mean, it's quite a massive subject, isn't it? And I'm wondering whether there needs to be like more volumes of this, or whether you think you've captured it in this.
I don't know.
Yes.
I think yeah, the sort of cultural association of colour is a massive area, and I think I've only like very briefly kind of touched upon it really. It was definitely something that was in the brief from the publishers that they wanted to cover. And I think it's what I think is quite interesting about this area is the cultural associations that are continued, that are embedded almost, and how certain cultures have picked up on certain words or certain tones that seemingly kind of drift through history into the modern day, and we don't know why we've kind of got those associations. And so yeah, the sort of colonialism of colour and that kind of that driver is definitely there, because they're just things that have been brought through history and we're not quite sure why we have them. And I think that's quite interesting because it means that we've just kind of got embedded associations with things and see them as positives or negatives somehow. And I think that's quite a traditional way of looking at something. Sort of certain colours in certain countries mean certain things, and therefore we shouldn't choose them because they mean death, or they mean something negative. But like we're rapidly changing in terms of like the world around us, and how we're perceiving information and data and everything. And I think that means ultimately that colour associations are going to change as well. And we've seen that come through in certain colours already. Like I have already mentioned pink, but pink's had a massive transformation in terms of like what we culturally associated with it, to do with its gender connotations.
Yeah.
And now it's like it's a neutral that we don't even blink twice at. Like we're painting in interiors, everybody's wearing it, and it's not assigned to a gender anymore. And it's really transforming the way that we're even like digesting colour. And I think that's going to happen more and more as we move forwards, for sure.
I think that the reclassification, if you like, of colours, or it's, I mean, I just find everything, all those classic things from when I was younger, which were fixed, seem to be shifting, across lots of different spectrums of gender and race, and cultural changes are really exciting at the moment, and I think colour is benefiting from that as well, and people becoming more aware of the impact of space and materials on behaviour as well. I think that's something we really push to try and get our heads around. I think the thing that's interesting is it's not just about, oh, let's choose some colours because we need to decorate this space. It's about how that can contribute to either the brand of a company or the experience of the people within a space, more fundamental connections which are sort of built into the impact that colour has.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I briefly touched upon it in the book, which is about neuroaesthetics, which is this kind of fairly new field. It's I think we've known about colour psychology, and I suppose if you study colour as well, like colour psychology and the influence of certain colour tones on mood has kind of been there, but it's been a little bit fluffy, and it's often there sometimes behind like kind of brand guidelines, or how to use brand colours or whatever. And we have some of them, and they're quite linked with like quite traditional things. So like blue and dark blues have always been associated with authority, and we're carrying that legacy on a little bit, but it's a bit dated, to be honest. And neuroaesthetics is a really interesting scientific area, which is giving us some actual data to say that colour, texture, tactility, materials coming together can directly influence our brains, like the neurological signals, the state of the brain, how it responds when it feels relaxed, when it feels activated, and that can actually be mapped back to kind of actual brain patterns. So it's actually scientific data now. So it's less woolly as saying, you know, green is associated with nature, therefore every time we apply green we feel closer to the outdoors, which is, you know, they're quite sweeping statements,
Fairly
but
basic, that isn't it?
yeah, but they are fundamentals, and they are covered in the book as well. But I think neuroaesthetics is where, you know, you've got actual scientific evidence, and actually Google did a really interesting project in Milan Furniture Fair a couple of years ago, where they plotted individual rooms with different color schemes and use sensors, so wearable sensors, to track things like perspiration, heart rate in the through the different users going through these rooms. And so they had a really soft, natural, like overly very, very tactile, very, very neutral but natural kind of room. They had one that was about kind of complementary opposites and quite strong color, quite sort of playful, strong color. And then they had a room of monochromatics as well, very soft monochromatics. And you know, you got actual, after being through this experience, you got your actual data, your kind of physiological data out of the back of it that told you which room you felt the most comfortable and the most relaxed in terms of the colors and materials and tactility. And I just thought it was really interesting, because I was like, I know I must feel home at home in the most colorful room, right? But actually my data gave me back that I felt at ease and relaxed in the sort of natural environment, the first room, the soft, tactile, muted kind of natural color room. That's where my heart rate was the lowest, and that's where I felt most at relaxed.
Is that different for other people? Does it vary?
Yeah, so actually I went through with a whole raft of friends and colleagues, and we all had various
came out with different results.
Yeah, different results.
Yeah.
And so, you know, obviously color is subjective. You know, we can't design a color that's for every single person, it's going to fit for all. But there's certain ways that we can sort of understand that, you know, there's certain groups of colors or certain types of tactility that we know will be relaxing or activating, and therefore you can kind of use those as made kind of guide points, especially if you're designing, I think, as well, or putting together, you know, an experience or a room or a, you know, an interior or a building, for instance.
Yeah. And so it's not just the actual color itself, it's the material quality of it, and if we're able to touch it, I guess also the acoustics of space as well might impact on how we feel. So if there's any texture, it's quite complex then, isn't it? So what's the tip for students to try and get their head around it, how to get into this as a subject?
Yeah, I think it is a really complex subject, but I suppose within the book, I try to simplify some of those main elements down, and I think that is the key, is so that to sort of access this subject area, is to take some of those fundamental principles on to do with colour psychology and colour theory, and see if you can directly start applying them in your work. So basically, when you're putting together a colour palette, or starting to integrate thinking about putting a colour palette into your project, is look back at some of that stuff, especially to do with you know, colours that are quite close to each other, create much more kind of harmonious combinations versus things that are opposite. And I think those fundamental kind of principles can be applied depending on, you know, the environment, the interior, and where you want to draw people's attention to, you know, what kind of space is it. Obviously context is massive when it comes to color, and users, and what's the intention of the space needs to kind of be matched with some of those principles. But I think you can start to do that in a really, you know, sort of introductory way in the starts of projects, by just choosing your colours to sort of suit the context, but also thinking about those key principles in colour theory.
Yeah, and I was looking on your company, Colour of Saying, and you described, I had to look at what CMF was actually. That's, and I was pleased to see that color is the C at the start of, and is that a telling position of that? You think color is one of the most important elements, or are they all equally as important?
Yeah, it's like an industry term that people are becoming more familiar with, but I think in certain industries you probably wouldn't know what I meant. So especially in interior design and architecture, the word CMF would just be an alien acronym that you.
It's more to do with textiles and trends, is it? You think?
Yeah, I know it's come out of other industries. So specifically, textile design, also designers that were maybe putting together color palettes for automotive. Also in the consumer electronics industry or device industry or tech industry, CMF designers is quite a well-known term, but it's just not good enough that it means everything. But it means color, material, and finish. As a designer, you would be picking the color, materials, and finishes for a range of products based off that.
I'm just exposing my ignorance there. I've gone through my design career for years without knowing what it meant. But I think when I just read about what you do, and also your website is amazing, because I noticed in the top corner, there's a little thing, RGB numbers like moving. I'm thinking, what's that? And then I realized that as you move your cursor across the screen, it changes the color balance, and it's just incredible. I could just sit and watch that all day. But looking at colors, materials, and finishes as being, I see that as a really strong sort of prong of design approach, alongside context and user experience. That's that's your toolkit, isn't it, really, to create space? But how does it work in other industries then? Because you started as a textile designer, and you moved into trends and also color palettes, and you worked, I think it was for car manufacturer to start with. You had a placement. What was that process of moving from a textile designer? Still do textile design, or has that dropped off the scale a little bit?
Yeah, I think, as a CMF designer, you are, depending on the industry, you are still doing textile design, especially in the automotive sector. Textiles have always been there on seating and interiors. Whereas in certain other areas now, so especially tech's had a massive soft material revolution. And so lots of CMF designers now are designing soft textiles for really would have been quite hard and kind of quite clinical devices. So, Google's new, home device range is full of textiles, and wasn't like that 10 years ago. So I think to have textile knowledge is incredibly useful, because it's a soft material knowledge that often is missing from some areas of design. Product designers or industrial designers will know plastics very well, or hard materials very well, or to some degree, depending on their background as well, but will lack the textile knowledge and the soft componentry knowledge. And that's where CMF goes into its strengths, really, because you often find that lots of textile designers go into that area because they have an appreciation for sensory, touch, tactility, and all those sorts of things, and they go alongside learning about textiles. So learning about textiles when I studied was about what are textiles made from, down to their raw materials, all the way through to if I knit it like this or I print it like this, it's going to give me a tactile effect, and it's going to give me a sensory response. And I think, I studied learning materials, like learning textiles and what they can do as a fundamental structure of learning, not, there's a problem over here that needs solving, and there's a user experience issue over here. And, that came later in my career. But I went into an industry, a CMF design industry. I went first and I worked for Toyota after I graduated from the Royal College. It was an amazing experience to go and work in trim for a massive automotive manufacturer. And, I understood there how important textiles were into that kind of interior car experience, and how invested they were in textiles as a material. And I got to translate lots of my ideas into fully knitted and woven fabrics for them.
Mm.
which was a massive opportunity. And then I went and worked for Speedo, actually. That was one of my second jobs out of university. And I went to work in performance swimwear, massive different industry, but highly regarded colour and texture and pattern, right at the top of the design chain. It was, they sold product through colour and through print and through performance textiles.
Yeah.
And so I was really lucky to work in that field as well, because I got to work in an innovation hub that was innovating with the latest technology with kind of apparel textiles. And I was able to marry some of my ideas to do with colour and pattern together with them in certain projects, and that was really exciting. But I think like the biggest opportunity and the biggest kind of like learning curve was definitely working for Nokia. So after working for Speedo and Toyota as kind of like internship and then junior roles, I went into work for Nokia as a CMF designer, but I didn't know what that meant. And the lady who my wonderful boss who invited me to work for Nokia was like, we've got this new team, it's called CMF design, do you want to come and work in there? And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And she was like, it's basically everything that you're doing, but you don't maybe have a term for it. And it's color, material and finish joining together to create user experiences. And we know now that through doing consumer insight research, through doing consumer profiling, we know that color, material, finish is really, really key for products, and we need people to like stitch those two kind of worlds together and understand user experience and color and material design and create great products. And at the end of the day, they did actually do that quite successfully at a certain point in time, because they launched smartphones onto the market through solid, beautiful, attractive and very, very appealing color. And I was there at that time, so I was a new young designer being part of a multidisciplinary team of consumer insights, color and material design, manufacturing, design for manufacture, through plastics, metals, textiles, glass. And that's where I learned absolutely pretty much the start point of working in industry, basically, in that field.
Yeah, that's a great set of I mean, the steps, were they that not necessarily planned but just happened? I think that's often the way, isn't it? You get the opportunities and that leads you in a direction that then you can start to exploit.
Yeah, definitely. Like I definitely had a massive interest in materials, and I made that really clear through my MA work. I didn't just print on textiles, I was printing on plastics, moldable plastics. I was investigating polymers. I was looking at, quite different things to some of the things that my peers were looking into. And I made a real like kind of road or path very much in product design. I was very interested in form and shape and not really interested in textiles being flat at all. And so I wanted to go beyond a traditional textile I suppose career path initially. I knew I wanted to push, but I didn't know exactly what like CMF design was. And I just got a series of really lucky breaks really and opportunities. And I think you get opportunities a lot, but you don't always take them. And so I just ended up taking a few at that particular time and not being scared to try things out, like move to Japan, work for Toyota, come back into the UK, work for Speedo in Nottingham, and then go to London and work for Nokia. That was quite speedy like transaction of things, I suppose, as a young designer. But I think you've got the flexibility then, and that's when you should just be like, right, yeah, okay, I'm going to give this a go.
Try out. Yeah, sounds great. And your interest in not the end product so much in textiles, but the actual process of constructing and creating, because I love the idea of like knitted things. They're basically made out of yarn, aren't they? And how you knit them affects the way it performs, whether it stretches or the colors as well. You can sort of weave into that or knit into it. But that constructed textile constructed out of things is quite a nice approach, isn't it, to think about it rather than, oh, what am I going to make out of this thing? And that must have helped you in your being flexible enough to move across the industries like that.
Yeah, definitely, because it's the knowledge really about materials and the knowledge about textiles that's the transportable thing, and they're at the base of lots of things that we design and digest and consume, and I think it can be translated. I think it's the approach that's quite important, because I think in industry, and keeping that approach to do with the knowledge as well, and embedding the knowledge in the design conversations and in the design projects that you work on industry as well, because I think in industry there's often, you know, different drivers and different motivations for projects and things, and often, you know, unless there is somebody there with the material knowledge, things kind of get lost along the way. So it's really good to know that if you knit something in a certain way, you can create structure and rigidity, you can create pockets, you can create, like, you know, the way that, you know, I've worked a lot in sort of in some automotive seating projects, and, you know, you can, you know, design things, which means things hook around and they can be modular and replaceable because of the way that they're knitted. Also, woven textiles as well have become very important to products and how they're constructed as well, because they're very, very strong in another way. They are very kind of durable, and will withstand lots of things beyond that something that's knitted will as well. So it's kind of understanding the context and the sort of rationale for why you might have certain materials, and that's quite important too. And so, yeah, it's different. But I think now I've had a lot of time to reflect on the things that I've done through my career. And I've really enjoyed some of the user-centered stuff that I've done, and also working towards a design brief that is often, you know, got much more of a bigger question behind it, or, you know, it's working with engineers, designers all together in order to solve something. But I like being that person that says, you know, you can do this, and we could, you know, work the material and make it perform like this, or actually if we change the appearance, we can change what this product even feels like to a consumer. And yeah, it just depends on the nature of the project and the length of the project, how much of that you can kind of get to work in industry, I suppose. It depends who you're working for too as well.
With all this consultancy work, and what point did you think, oh, I can do this for myself and set up your own business?
It's a tricky one. Like I went from working in brands, so after having time with people like Nokia, I went to work for more consultancy, design, service-led companies. So I worked for Native for a while, and I also worked for a really small colour consultancy that was called Global Colour Research. And so both of those situations were client-facing. And so there was multiple clients that came in from cross industries, and they wanted innovative solutions for the future, basically, in different ways. So the colour consultancy, it was all about like predicting future palettes and future intentions of consumers, whereas at Native, an innovation firm, it was all about solving problems quickly and agile, and with agile thinking and design thinking, but it was really different. It was kind of like, how do we solve, like, you know, the future of kind of solar energy, all the way through to, like, you know, let's make a car interior look better, or what a future expression of a car interior could be. And so, yeah, I guess all of those experiences led me to think that, you know, the colour and material element is quite translatable across different industries. And when I left some of those places, I took clients with me, not in a kind of like aggressive, I'm going to take these clients with me, but people followed me because my network was massive, and it started to grow. And clients came to me, and as soon as I said I was independent, they approached me to work with them and do new projects. And I guess I had to have a bit of the confidence to know that I could do it as well. And so this was a few years into this whole, like, my entire career path. So And I've dipped in and out of working in-house and being a consultant quite a lot, but I suppose now I'm finding the gaps are bigger. So I've been an independent consultant for around sort of 5 years now, and I haven't really dipped back into like a major role. I've kept going with innovation projects / trend forecasting / micro CMF projects in that time. But yeah, it's interesting, and I think obviously the more experience you have, it does make it a bit easier, but then at the same time, everything is changing, and you need to kind of be adaptive and iterate and be relevant as well. And that's what a lot of the clients that I work for want to know, is how to be relevant, how to keep up with consumer sort of changes or attitude changes, but also what's kind of going out there in the wider world. So like sustainability, huge topic, and yeah, lots of my work is interconnected in those two kind of fields, really.
Yeah. Is there a difference between the way you approach the future thinking trend forecasting and there must be a difference, I'm guessing. Silly question really, but what is the difference between the future thinking trend forecasting and then the specific problem solving tasks that you get?
Yeah, it's good to split it up like that, I think, because I do have two facets, and I think naturally I kind of fit in the middle, and I can translate quite a lot. So in terms of researching big mega drivers or big chunky subjects such as sustainability, or the pandemic and the sort of fallout of the pandemic. Obviously I'm using a lot more of my kind of like research skills, but I'm looking for insights really, and looking for opportunities, because ultimately, we can have a lot of data, and there is a lot of data out there to do with all of those subjects, but I suppose my job is to sort of filter that data and extract the most relevant stuff. And I try to do that per client. I think that's where there's the gap or the niche, because they have their own boundaries and their own drivers and their own consumers as well, and you need to kind of understand some of these future kind of scenarios for them. But I'm looking for opportunities. So basically I'm looking for the translation part really, although yes, I need to tell them what the biggest insights are, but I'm also showing them like, okay, and this is how you can pull that in to what you would like to do in the next like 2, 5, 10 years time.
That becomes more specific to the client then, like you say, what they're trying
it does. And then and then there's the problem solving stuff, which is more the CMF part, I would say, the strategy part, or the kind of the design application kind of part. And I think it is a slightly different part of my brain. It's definitely more like problem solving. It's definitely more creating a question and then answering it through the design ideas or the design opportunities that I can give to a certain product. And sometimes that might be just guidance. So it might be like putting palette together and then saying, here's the rationale behind your palette, so you can use it like this across your products, or you can use it in like this way across your interiors, to create different moods, to set different tones, to create different associations or different appeal levels to the products. And then sometimes it's actually like going quite a long way with a company and designing a material from scratch, or supporting them to do that. Working with suppliers, sometimes designing and working with suppliers, and going all the way through that R&D process with them. But yeah, it is different parts of my brain, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I was thinking about your typical week. You said you had a hectic week last week. You're teaching as well, aren't you? That's still another part of your brain engaged there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, I really like the translation part, right? And I think that's about teaching a little bit. It's like, how can you convey or disseminate like lots of the sort of stuff that's going on out there into education, so that young designers can really feel that they can move forward with some of these subject matters that are actually quite big and chunky, that they can actually relate to them. And also, I think it's important to teach about colour, material, finish, and bring that conversation into education, because it wasn't always there when I was learning, and it isn't always there now. And I really like the opportunity to go in and bring that expertise into that educational environment, and work with students, because I think they're the designers of the future, and they might not feel totally empowered to be like that at the moment, but by working with industry experts, I think they get loads more insight. And I say that every time I go and work in education as well. It's like, you can approach me, you can ask me for anything beyond the remit of this conversation or this lecture. Please feel free to like ask me anything, and if I can help you, I will. And of course lots of students don't, but some students do, and they follow you and they ask you for things, and I'm happy to give opportunities away. Any kind of recommendations I can make for students, I do, and they become the future. Like, I don't see design as a hierarchical structure, really. I don't, and I think it is like that in some cases, but I don't see it like that. I just think like the more knowledge that people have, the better that they will do something. And as designers, if we're well informed about what's going on in the world around us versus more intricacies to do with colours and materials, we will make better informed decisions. So that's more where my standpoint is on that aspect.
Yeah, and create a better place to live and work in, I guess.
Yeah,
I like the idea of sharing stuff. I mean, some of the stuff I teach my students take me 25 years to learn. It's like, well, why should I let them wait that long? It's like, give it to them now. It's gotta be better, hasn't it, than holding on to it.
It change as well. Like what I know now, if I give that to a younger generation, like they're only gonna it's like the next building block for them. What they know in 20 years time is going to be different, but it'll be based on the most relevant and recent information as well, which is what I've got.
Yeah.
Rather than there being these gaps. I think the world is changing really, really quickly, and there's lots of really critical issues that are going on to do with the planet and the climate. We need to activate students to think about this bigger picture, but without it feeling like it's something that we can't do. There's got to be little inroads in there to get students to respond to these problems and understand them as well.
You mentioned keeping on top of research or the latest things. What is your process of research? How do you go about keeping in touch with what's new? Where do you look for it?
Yeah, I guess I just am quite receptive, and so I'm looking and listening absolutely loads. Every day I read the news or listen to a podcast or collect data, and as a sort of process, once a week I just do like a dump or a mind map of things that I've it might be links to news articles or things that I've listened to, or a book that I've noted that's coming out, or an exhibition that's coming up. And I use things like Miro just to map out subjects as well, and just quite quickly and instinctually just set aside a little bit of time every week to compile those insights. But I'm generally all the time listening, and I listen to podcasts by sort of scientists or bioengineers, or political or social impact podcasts as well. And I just try and understand the general mood of what's going on out there, and I don't research every subject matter. I can't do that, but there's certain ones that I know are really important, such as materials and manufacturing, but also I'm really interested in craft in general and making skills. I'm interested in how that's evolving as well, with like new bioengineering and biotechnology developments. And I'm kind of really interested in inclusive design in general, and how that's kind of playing out now with kind of like shifting identities, and and sort of design needing to kind of respond to lots of like nuances of that, to do with like culture, race, gender, inequality, disability. And I'm also really interested in sustainability, or the circular economy, and how that's going to, and that kind of thinking is starting to impact, from a kind of policy level. We're starting to see lots of movement, but from a kind of disruptive, kind of activist, kind of brand standpoint, we're starting to see the influence of that on consumers as well. And so I'm looking for the most interesting innovations, from kind of architecture and permaculture, all the way through to kind of sort of materials that can be recycled, and services that are now being designed that help us eliminate waste as consumers, and that kind of thing. So those are general subjects that I'm researching for clients in my areas. And so mostly that is in product design and industrial design, in interiors and manufacturing. Those are the sort of main areas that I kind of work in.
And when you're working with clients, how do you measure the success of the project? Do you have your own sort of criteria, or what makes a good project for you?
I think it's when the client is, obviously we're looking for like client satisfaction is quite high, but also like products that genuinely, and a project that can genuinely make a difference, I think is quite important as well. So like how well that's actually, the design idea and the intent has kind of come together, I think as well, is quite important for me. So I was recently working on the kind of future of solar energy for a client. And as a CMF designer, I was asked to sort of input on the CMF for a set of solar products. And I was thinking, okay, how is this going to convey, like how's this going to work out?
They're on the roof, aren't they? Who cares?
On the roof, they're in our home. And actually like they're, in some of the more advanced, I suppose, design proposals, they're kind of like super modular, moving around the place. They're in rural locations as well. They're inside our living rooms,
Okay, yeah.
And so I'm thinking like, how can we make a more better connection with, the power of the sun and the power of solar? And so I use that as a methodology to design a color palette, which got assigned to the products, that gave logic to, where the solar palette power was in certain locations on the product. So the brighter yellow based colors were to sign this is where the solar potential or the solar energy is, the product that you need to interact with as a consumer in order to activate your product and activate the energy, let's say. Yeah. Whereas all the supporting products were slightly more muted, or kind of blending in with spaces a little bit more, because some of these were being brought into actual rural home living rooms, if you know what I mean. So
that sounds, so you've got a use of color to help differentiate elements of the product, but also a kind of narrative of
the sort of strategy behind and the narrative behind why you would assign that color in the first place. And I think when it comes to kind of measuring success, I really like clients usually respond really well when there's several layers in that, when there's like a narrative element, but then there's a kind of logic and application element which relates to function and usability. And that's when I think projects are quite successful. And I measure success is how well the concept can be supported by the CMF.
I'd like to thank Laura for taking the time to talk to me. The work she carries out really highlights the importance of colour and materials in the design process and the impact they have on the user experience. Her research into colour and her understanding of the impact is really well described in the Colour Bible, fantastic book that we mentioned There's a link in the podcast if you want to buy yourself a copy. Her career path demonstrates the breadth of opportunities that you can take advantage of from a starting point of your degree course if you open up your mind to the potential opportunities. And her interest in colour really highlights an area of design that has such impact on how we use and perceive objects and spaces, something that should be elevated much further up the hierarchy within the design process. That's something we're going to be trying to introduce to our students at the interior design course at the University of Plymouth, understanding the cultural references and the psychological impacts of colour and materials. It's going to inform the design process and create spaces that perform better and support users in a more meaningful way. So we'll be testing out some of her theories and approaches with the students in the coming months. If you'd like to know how to be a kick-ass interior designer, follow the links to the website at the University of Plymouth, where our approach puts users at the centre of the design process, and we aim to create spaces that support well-being, health, happiness and productivity. I'd like to thank Dave Clark from I Am The How for production support and invaluable advice in the setting up of this podcast, Kay Hansen for her planning support and co-hosting role for these and our educational podcasts at the University of Plymouth, and Mark Frith for the music. I'd really like to hear your feedback on the podcast. Get in touch via the website or on Instagram. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Thank you.